one of which is a sci-fi, LGBT-themed sci-fi space opera. And in addition to that, I have a deep and abiding love of all things science fiction, fantasy, comic books. To give you a little bit of context on that, some of my favorite movies from the 80s that kind of shaped my journey, Legend, if you all know Legend, Labyrinth, Dance Magic Dance, Neverending Story, and of course Transformers the movie, because you just cannot have loved that. And I'm also one of the co-founders of EagleCon. Our other co-founder is actually in our audience, so shout out to Rhonda. Yes. But the reason why I mention all of those things is because I want you all to kind of have an idea of when I say that I'm really excited about this moment, really excited about being able to present this particular portion. I really do mean it, because this is a thrill for me. So I am truly thrilled to be able to be here to present the Prism Award this year. The EagleCon Prism Award is given in recognition of the envisioning and projection of a diverse and representative spectrum of people into the future through artistic media. It's a mouthful, right? And I'm very pleased to share that this year's recipient is none other than Mr. Brandon Easton. Brandon Easton is a professional writer, screenwriter, and educator based in Los Angeles. Born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, Easton is a graduate of Ithaca College, where he earned a BA in sociology, Boston University, where he earned an MFA in screenwriting, and Lehman College, where he earned a Master's of Education in History. He taught public school for 5 years in New York City before moving to Hollywood, where he scored a gig on Warner Brothers' Thundercats TV reboot and Hasbro's Transformers Rescue Bots. And as someone who works in education, the transition from education to sci-fi fantasy is one that I find particularly inspirational and fascinating. In 2012, Brandon signed a multi-graphic novel writing deal with Lionforge Comics and has authored multiple comic books, including the Joshua Run, Roboy, and an upcoming biographical graphic novel about the life of pro wrestler Andre the Giant. 2015, already came out. In 2013, Brandon was a guest writer for Watson and Holmes comic series published by New Paradigm Studios. His original graphic novel, Shadowlaw, garnered coverage in publications and outlets like USA Today, Wired, Forbes, and Ain't It Cool News. Easton is the producer, writer, director of Brave New Souls, Black Sci-Fi and Fantasy Writers of the 21st Century, a documentary that addresses issues of race and representation in the comic book industry, genre publishing, and in Hollywood. Easton is also the recipient of a 2013 Glyph Award for Best Writer for his original graphic novel, Shadowlaw. In 2014, he was nominated for the Eisner Comic Industry Award, heralded as comics equivalent to the Academy Award, for Best Single Issue or One Shot, as well as 3 Glyph Awards in 2014 from the East Coast Black Age of Comics, including Fan Award, Story of the Year, and Best Writer, all for Watson and Holmes issue number 6. Easton is the recipient of the 2015 Disney ABC Writing Program Fellowship, which led to a great run on Marvel's Agent Carter. And some of his current and upcoming projects include Star Trek, Year 5, Marvel Action Spider-Man, Marvel's Avengers Assemble, and Transformers War for Cybertron. Please put your hands together as we welcome a very talented young man and a great, great friend of EagleCon, Mr. Brandon Easton.
This is incredible. Thanks everyone for showing up. I have to first, before I say anything, give a shout out to 3 folks who really, or 4 actually. There would be Dr. Patrick Sharp, Rhonda Williams? Mitchell, sorry. Christopher Johnson, and my friend Hannibal Taboo, who 7 years ago approached me to be a part of this. And as a former teacher, the melding of literacy with storytelling is my ultimate goal, especially for some populations where I used to teach in New York City that were not natural readers. I think it is utterly important for people to control a narrative. And as a screenwriter, and also as an African-American man who's 6'2", You know, I understand how narratives shape interactions, how narratives shape expectations, you know? There's a classic term that I talk about a lot, and it's called the soft bigotry of lowered expectations, meaning that people will just, based on what you look like or what they believe of you, assume the least of you. They will assume criminality, stupidity, all kinds of things. Being from the East Coast, and this is not a knock on LA, but being an East Coast guy, the reputation of Los Angeles, especially in New York, is that people aren't honest here. People are fake. People don't tell the truth. They don't talk about their real feelings. As someone who is not from here and has lived here for almost, 12 years, some of that is true. People do not talk about their real feelings. People are more concerned with being polite than being honest and having real conversations. One of the things that hit me hard recently was that the African American population of Los Angeles is 8%, but the population of homeless African Americans is African Americans make up 42% of the homeless population. That is an absurd number. That skews against just basic mathematical logic. And part of me wonders, why is it so? My own experiences in this town have shown that there's an antagonism, there's a fear, a tangible fear of African Americans, particularly African American males. And I'm trying to do what I can to change that. We're living in a world where children are living in cages as we speak, right now. We're living in a world where there are armed immigration troops going through neighborhoods, right now, all over the United States. And a lot of this happened because we don't talk honestly about how we feel about things. People were afraid in 2016, so they voted for somebody who capitulated on their fears. And if people could talk about how they feel, maybe we wouldn't be in the situation we're in now. So narratives are important. Honest stories are important from every walk of life, whether it be someone from a Native American reservation in Idaho, or somebody who grew up in East LA, or somebody who grew up in Compton in 1989. There's certain realities that need to be addressed and challenged. And science fiction does it well. Star Trek has told so many stories. You know, The Matrix told a story about free will versus manipulation. You know, Transformers movies, not so much, not the newer ones. But the Marvel films, what they're really about is how far you're willing to go for something you believe in. That's what the entire MCU is ultimately about. Every Marvel movie has the exact same story almost. How far are you willing to go for what you believe in? And I ask you that. Whatever your goal is, whatever degrees, if you want to get more than one, go for it. Whatever career you want to build for yourself, don't ever be afraid of going too far. Going too far in the service of your dreams is just called determination. I speak as someone who was homeless for 30 days. I had an apartment fire, back in January of 2010. I was homeless for 30 days. I was working 2 jobs at the time. I still went to work. At night, I slept either in a car or I slept on somebody's couch. And now, all these years later, my ultimate dream has come true. I got to write Generation 1 Transformers for adults. The show I'm working on, finished it, but the show is called Transformers War for Cybertron Siege. It'll be on Netflix in June. The trailer went up, tons of millions of views already. If you haven't seen the trailer, maybe I can show it. Sorry, maybe I can show it in my workshop at 12 noon. So ultimately, I bring up all these somewhat difficult ideas and difficult issues just for the sake of planting the seed of honesty. Not to say that you're not, but don't be afraid to share your honest feelings. If you are afraid of certain people in society, you need to be honest about it. If you are hateful of certain people, you need to be honest about it. Because racism, sexism, homophobia, classism are all cancers on the American soul. And my mom, who beat breast cancer, thank God, one thing I learned from her experience is that you cannot pretend it doesn't exist. You know, she didn't get metastatic breast cancer, which meant it would have spread and killed her, but she got breast cancer and beat it. And during her chemo, the one thing she kept talking to me about was she was glad that she didn't pretend she didn't have it. We all have fears, we all have biases, we all have prejudices. We cannot pretend they don't exist because they only get worse as we get older. So with that being said, I just want to say I am deeply honored and thankful for the folks at Eagle Con and the folks, Christopher, Rhonda, Dr. Sharp, and my friend Hannibal, where I don't know where he is right now, who took a chance on me. I debuted my documentary here. The world premiere was here, downstairs on this campus, back in 2013. And to this day, I'm still forever grateful for your faith in me and taking me seriously when very few people in this town would. And that will always mean something to me from you guys. And to the end of my days, I will remember that. So thank you very much. And I humbly and I'm deeply honored to accept the Prism Award from you guys. Thank you very much.
So while we've got you here, we're gonna just dive into a couple of questions, and then we'll kind of get a conversation going, and then we would love for you folks in the audience to ask any questions that you might have as well.
I got it. Good, got it. Good. There we go. Yeah. Hello. Yeah, nice.
Okay, so starting off, the Prism Award, which I will gladly hand you in just a couple of minutes,
No problem.
is all about diverse characters and stories written by diverse writers. And that will undoubtedly go on to touch and inspire, hopefully really shine a light and a path for future creatives and future creative folks. You talked a little bit about this, but can you talk a little bit more about why do you feel that diverse voices are important? And what does it mean to you to be able to contribute to that amazing pool of talent?
I'll give you the perfect example right now. I talked about this yesterday. I taught a class at, I gave a lecture at NYU in LA, which is over by the Grove, right? And I talked about the importance of the female gaze, or the woman's gaze. And when you have a woman director, it definitely changes how women are portrayed on screen, right? Best example, Harley Quinn. There's two versions of Harley Quinn. I'm not talking about the animated. I mean, there's two versions in live actions, both played by Margot Robbie, right? The first version is in Suicide Squad, where she's wearing a push-up bra. The second version is in the Harley Quinn movie, the Birds of Prey movie, but it's directed by a woman. She doesn't have a push-up bra.
Right.
Something that small, but it's everything. No pun intended, you know. But it's everything that you didn't have to sexualize her character. She could just be an action hero, or anti-hero in this case. But in the Suicide Squad movie, they went out of their way to keep reminding you of how sexual she was. But in a movie directed by a woman, you didn't have to do that. Patty Jenkins in Wonder Woman, you didn't have to do that. Gal Gadot is visually beautiful, but that wasn't the point of the story. You know, whereas certain other people have directed, like, for example, Megan Fox in Transformers 1. Every shot is just like weird porno shot. And I'm like, wait a minute, why is no human being leans over a car like this? You know, but, you know, the woman's gaze versus the male gaze. Yeah. You see what I'm getting at? Things like that matter because little girls and little boys, importantly, as important, see these images and they internalize them. And images are, people believe what they see, not what they hear or not what they read. So if you show women only being a certain way, then people grow up and it becomes internalized. And then they start acting out certain ways, right? And it goes on and on and on. So the importance of having a person own their story and tell their story, I mean, that's vitally important. You know, because if you leave it to someone else, and I spoke of biases and prejudices and fears, I don't want someone who's scared of black people telling black stories. But it's been happening for 125 years now. And you can see the results. Pimp, slave, criminal, you know, athlete, that's it. You know, and then if you do have a smart black person, they blew up the world like in Terminator 2. You know, I'm just like, oh, okay, the only black dude in the whole movie is responsible for extermination of the planet. Oh, great, awesome. Thanks, James Cameron. You know, but you have to think of it that way. So I've read stories. I mean, I'm an old school science fiction person. I'll go back to the earliest days. H.G. Wells, Mary Shelley, Bram Stoker. Even though it's horror, it's still speculative fiction. You know, you go to Isaac Asimov's, Arthur C. Clarke's, with the exception of one person. I'm mainly naming white men. You know, and I've seen the difference in storytelling. Not to mention Lovecraft, who had a poem called "On the Creation of Niggers." you know, and H.P. Lovecraft, all these people think, oh, he's so great, but he's one of the worst human beings to ever exist, particularly when it comes to issues of race. I mean, he is insanely racist, and his work is peppered with just hate of everyone who's not like him. But is it important? You know, it's the whole argument with Woody Allen, you know, now. It's like Woody Allen has been accused of some fairly horrible things. You separate or Bill Cosby or Harvey Weinstein. Like Harvey Weinstein, if you look at how many movies he's responsible for, it's like every movie we've ever watched.
Right, yeah.
Every movie that's like half the movies that won Academy Awards in the last 20 or 30 years have been Harvey Weinstein productions. Do we pretend that didn't happen? Or do we say, well, he's thankfully in jail, but maybe I won't support it financially, but do I still watch it to study it?
Right.
You know, because Quentin Tarantino and Kevin Smith whole careers are based upon Harvey Weinstein. You know, so we're in a place where you have to start thinking about who's the author and how do I support that person financially? You know, like R. Kelly's of the world. You know, Bill Cosby. I mean, the Cosby Show I grew up with.
Right.
I had to divorce that from my cultural DNA. Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. You know, these were things that were formative for me. I was born in the 70s. You know, so it's vitally important for people to own their stories, because if you let someone else tell your story, you'll get some pretty horrible stuff sometimes. Yeah.
Make some excellent points. I mean, especially having to really look at how much should we attribute to the creators, and do we let that stuff go? Like you said, but losing the Cosby Show was painful. That was painful. I was just like, yeah, okay, my whole world can't have anything.
Not anymore.
Right. So I totally feel that, and agree. That's very true. Along the same lines, you had your documentary that you premiered here, Brave New Souls. Let's talk about that a little bit. Like, what was that project like for you? Like, why was that an important project for you? And why did you have to? Because you wrote it, you directed it, you shot it, produced it. Like, you were that movie, you were that documentary. So like, why was that so important for you? What drove you about that?
Honestly, what really did it for me was I was tired of, I'm going to be extremely specific. I was tired of black geeks complaining online about what Marvel and DC weren't doing for them, or what certain movie companies weren't doing for them. Basically, there was a point between 2005 and 2012 where Facebook became the thing where people were living on, because MySpace had died, if people remember MySpace.
R.I.P. MySpace.
You know, there was a short-lived garbage site called Friendster, which was very similar.
Yeah.
Well, after all that died, there was this like, it's still there. There's all these black comic book fans and sci-fi fans who were like, well, won't this person do this story? And I'm like, there's already all these people, like Octavia Butler, old school, Samuel Delaney, old school, Brandon Massey, older, you know, more recent. And then very recently, Nnedi Okorafor and N.K. Jemisin, and I mean, just the list goes on and on. It's all these folks who are already doing these stories, but the black community wasn't supporting them. And they spent more time, instead of doing research on who these people were, they would get online and complain about what Marvel and DC weren't doing for them. And I'm just like, why do that? There's already people, but sometimes I used to believe the internet would change the world for the better. I learned that, boy, was I wrong, you know? I felt that it was my responsibility as not only a creator, but as a fan, to let people know of all these folks who I knew in my circles who were winning major awards, who were working on big TV shows. Like, for example, I'll give you the best example. The Crisis, the DC Universe stuff, Flash and Arrow and all that, 2 of those shows are run by black men. Flash and Arrow well, Arrow's done, but the Flash is run by a black guy named Eric Wallace. Right now. You know, a lot of people don't know that, but that's why you see, what's her name, Candace Patton's character.
Iris West Allen.
Iris is black again.
Yeah.
Suddenly, she's like, oh, well, I'm gonna get my hair done, and I do all these things, because you have an African-American showrunner, who makes sure that African-American cultural benchmarks show up. And then you have Latino writers on The Flash to make sure Cisco isn't portrayed as an idiot.
Right.
You know, just like on Supernatural. There's what's his name? I can't remember his name, but it's a dude. He's from East LA. He's a writer on Supernatural in the last seasons. And he made sure that the Latino characters were presented a certain way, because there had never been a Latino writer. All 13 seasons, up until, it's been on 15 years,
yeah.
Up to 13 seasons or 12 seasons, they didn't have any writers of color on Supernatural, you know, until he got on it. You know, and you can look at, if you go to the IMDb, there's only one Latino name under the writers, and that's that guy, you know. And he's from the ABC writing program as well, the year before me. So
I feel like, it's important to know that these people are out there and to give them support because no one else will.
Right.
And what show? Queen of the South. Last year, for 2 years, was run by a Latina showrunner. And that was important because there's certain things you don't want said. Like if somebody has no interaction with Mexican Americans or Mexicans or Central Americans, and you put them on a show like that, who knows what kind of nonsense is going to come up? So you have to get someone from the community to make sure that you don't, while telling a crime story, reinforce negative stereotypes. So really, I wanted to shine a light on folks like Natalie Chaves, who ran Queen of the South, or Eric Wallace, or Derek Hughes, and Oba Muhammad, who works on Legends of Tomorrow. And right now, Power, the show on Stars, Black, Asian, and Latino showrunners across the board there. And there's not even a lot of Asians on the show. But it was important to have that because it's going to take place in certain spaces where there are Asian Americans. And it's little things, just the little things. And that's what's important to me. Why I made that was to let people know these folks exist. Yeah.
That's a huge thing that keeps coming up, even in publishing more, even outside of science fiction and fantasy, the idea of folks being able to tell their own stories, own story, it's a whole hashtag, where and that conversation, and I hear that conversation a lot because I went to writing school, for whatever that's worth, and that program that I was in, the folks that I met there and I interacted with there were like 90% white, which is fine, but the conversation comes up and the question comes up, well, what stories are folks telling? What stories should folks be telling? Are we giving space for people to tell their own stories and give that and really give honor to that and respect to that, or are we just kind of being like, well, maybe you can just stick to this genre or this avenue or this angle? And so that's a conversation that I hear a lot about really embracing and allowing folks to have that space and tell those stories.
Sure.
One example of that I've seen that I've really, really enjoyed, Rick Riordan, who wrote Percy Jackson and The Lightning Thief in that series, he wrote that first series and came up with the Kane Chronicles, which was about mixed race kids kind of dealing with Egyptian gods. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. But since then, he has now gone into presents mode, and he's actually getting folks from communities to be able to write their own stories.
Right.
And we're talking about African and African American traditions. We're talking about Native American traditions. We're talking about Asian and Asian American traditions. And being able to see that transition is really exciting. And how he's used his platform to then be like, okay, we're gonna let people tell their own stories.
Right.
So I think that's a big thing that keeps coming up, and it's very impactful for everybody who's trying to write and get into that world and kind of be a creator. So you've worked on, you've done live action series,
yes.
You've done animated series, you've done comic books, you've done graphic novels, you've done documentary, you've worked across all of these different sort of genres and media. What is that like going from live action to animated to back to comics to back and forth? What does that look like for you? What is that like?
It can be frustrating when you don't have time. Because the best problem to have is too many deadlines. Because you'll get paid someday, but it's good to have those deadlines. Right, I get asked this a lot. So this is the main difference it's budget. Comics, you can draw, if you can hire artists and pay them or whatever, you can draw anything you want to draw, and it costs you a couple bucks to, maybe for pure actual, for a budget, you can draw something like that for like 30, 20, sometimes $10, and even cheaper if you know where to get art supplies for next to nothing, right? To do that in live action, that's about $2, $3, $10, $20, $30 million. So in a comic book, you can draw whatever you want to draw on screen, and you draw on a page, and you can just have it happen. And TV, which is super budget conscious, you have to have a lot of talking head scenes. This is why if you watch some of these science fiction shows for Netflix or Amazon and Hulu, they'll have one episode of just, everything's blowing up, and then like 5 episodes of because the budget was blown on, because Game of Thrones is like that. Yeah. Was like, past tense. Like, you'll have Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones.
You have, there was that one season that had that final battle on the wall, but most of that season was, let's rape people, let's kill people, and then the big battle at the wall with the giants and blah 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 blah. You know, so you see it's extremely budget conscious, and movies are even more budget conscious because you don't get. Back in the day, you get a movie like Beetlejuice or Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, or I'm trying to think of mid-budget things that did really well. Even like Pretty Women, you know, stuff like that, which didn't cost a lot but made a whole lot of money because studios were more willing to take chances on things like original concepts, like Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Right. You know, all this stuff was stuff that we never seen before. Like Beetlejuice it wasn't a comic book. That was just something somebody came up with, and there were tons of movies. Inner Space, you know, I can keep going. All these movies from the 80s that, you know, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Yeah. You know, all those like teenage movies, Pretty in Pink, and what's the one with the, Don't You Forget About the Breakfast Club. You know, all that stuff, these were based on original ideas and were very, but guess what? People wanted to see those stories. Now, there's no more it's boom, 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 boom for like 2.5 hours with no real emotional connection. Right? So Hollywood knows that people want to go for their thrill ride because movies are less movies now and more like when you go to Universal or the rides at Disney. Yeah. Like Scorsese said. I mean, people were mad at Scorsese because he trashed Marvel movies, but he wasn't wrong. They are thrill park rides. I mean, the last 20 minutes of Avengers Endgame could have been a ride at Disneyland. And it was great. I'm not saying
probably will be.
Or it will be, right? Because they're building Marvel Land down there, right? So the trick is that movies are now less concerned with and the emotional connection, which is giving you a thrill ride. TV is where the emotional connection is now, clearly. You know, and comics are everything. You can have comics which are just boom, 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 and also there's comics about sex. There's comics about westerns. There's multiple genres in comics. The problem is people look at comics as only superheroes. Superheroes is a genre within comics. There are detective comics, love comics, Western comics, space comics, so forth and so on. I mean, one of my favorite comic books, which I recommend to any human being alive, is a series called Strangers in Paradise, which is a story by Terry Moore, which is a story about two women who loved each other but could never, consummate, because they had all these things going on in their lives. But they were roommates who were in love with each other romantically, but their personal lives outside of their relationship just kept breaking them apart. And that book lasted for years. And there's like, you can buy the box set and it's like this thick, but it's all black and white and it's all blah, 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 blah. But it's a comic series that I wish more people would read. They've been trying to develop Strangers in Paradise into a TV series forever. And they can't pull it off because it requires like the people who did like, Chernobyl. Like you need like Damon Lindelof's of the world to translate that. But that's the kind of stuff that's out there that I think people should be taking a chance on instead of just the Marvel stuff and DC stuff. Because I think the stuff that'll grab you emotionally is outside of the Marvel and DC sphere, in my opinion. That's just how I feel about it.
I think that's so true, but one of the problems that we're seeing with that is again, these voices, these projects, these things that actually have the emotional gravitas that you're talking about, they get completely overshadowed by the work of Marvel and DC, which is great. Like no one's knocking Marvel and DC. I love Marvel and DC. I go to all their stuff, but it does overshadow these other projects that can come up and can have that same kind of impact for folks, but you never get to see them and you don't even talk about them, and people for the most part don't even know they exist.
Exactly.
Which is why we have EagleCon. Thank you for coming. Alrighty. The Eisner.
Yes.
Let's talk about the Eisner. What was that like? What was that moment like when you heard the news that you had been nominated for the Eisner? Yeah.
I was stunned. I didn't expect it. And again, the Eisner is sort of like the Academy Award of Comics. They get handed out at San Diego Comic-Con every year, usually on Friday night. I was stunned. I didn't win. So, but because people who say it's an honor to be nominated, it's never been nominated and lost. Trust me, it's not funny. But the person who beat me was Matt Fraction for a Hawkeye series, which was fun because that issue of Hawkeye, I think what bothered me was it was a Hawkeye issue from the perspective of a dog that beat me for Watson and Holmes. And I was like, okay, a dog book? It's not even Lassie, it's Hawkeye's dog.
Like, who's Hawkeye's dog?
He had a dog, and the whole story takes place in a series of glyphs from a dog. Like, what was that movie, Inside Out? What was the movie? There was a movie where it ended where it showed the inside of a dog's brain, and it was just food. And it was like food, and that was the last shot of the movie. But the trick was like the Hawkeye issue was all glyphs and like almost meme type images,
Yeah.
icons, excuse me, of how a dog, emojis, I'm sorry, that's the word I'm looking for. It was, the whole issue was emojis about how dogs think about the world, but it was in Hawkeye's world. So it was like superhero stuff, but from a dog's perspective, which was a cool idea, but I was just angry that I lost to a dog. So, but that was that. Yeah. Huh? Of course, that's the trick.
Everyone loves dogs, but
But no, I mean, it was cool. I mean, but yeah, that was that. I mean, the Eisner, it was one of many award type things, and you know, it was a good night, and I had a great time. And it was the first night that Showtime, the network, had sponsored the Eisner. So they were trying to put it on TV. It didn't work, but it was when San Diego Comic-Con was trying to stream on Showtime, which was an interesting concept. You know? Yeah.
Speaking of awards, as someone who has been nominated for multiple things and won multiple awards, like people have different feelings about awards. Like some people are like, yeah, they're great. It highlights people's talents. It gives people an opportunity to get recognized. Some people are like, I don't play that game. It's political. It's whatever. What are your kind of thoughts and feelings about awards? Are they important? Why are they important? Do they do the job of highlighting folks who deserve to be highlighted, or are, for the most part, are they sort of just more?
If you pay attention to it, it can be important. But what's happened is the community of people who care about awards are getting smaller and smaller every year, because, and this is something I'm going to talk about, and I hope we get the chance when people ask, when we get to the Q&A section, we can get into this. But I feel that the fragmentation of pop culture is what's helping to create more divisions in society. And I'll explain what I mean by that. In the early 80s, there were only 3 networks: ABC, CBS, and NBC. So that meant that almost all of the population who owned a television set, which was most people, not everybody, we all saw the same things. So we all had a shared communal experience in pop culture. So if you went to work on Monday after like something big that happened over like on a Sunday night on some big show, everyone on Monday, everybody was talking about it, right? Back in the day, this is a great, I'm totally dating myself. There was a show called Dynasty, not the CW remake, but the original Dynasty. And it was one of the few shows in history where women openly called each other bitches on television. Like, you never saw it, like not at nighttime. And like, Alexis called Crystal, said, "You a bitch," and they started fighting. And the whole nation was like, oh my God. I mean, 40, 50 million people were going crazy over this. Yeah. So on that next Monday, everyone was talking about Crystal fighting Alexis. We no longer have that now, because there's 15 billion streaming services. There's, like 5, 6 networks. No one's watching the same stuff. Right. So now the ability to connect outside of conventions is gotten smaller. So it's like, I watch shows that, one of my favorite shows is It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, right? But not everybody watches it. Right. So there was a point when I was just like, why is nobody watching? Like, what happened? It was on FX, but not everybody watches FX. Right. And so it gets smaller and smaller. So the ability to connect is starting to drift. It's getting harder now. Because we don't have shared pop culture experiences anymore. And without that, like, what are going to be the threads of society? Like, how are we going to connect with people? Right. I don't know. That's why it's all awards. I mean, it depends who's paying attention. Because not everybody does. This year's Academy Awards were the least watched in history. So, I don't know.
That's a good one. And also Dynasty, OG Dynasty. That's real.
You can watch it, man.
YouTube, Dominique Devereaux, you're welcome. All right, with that, thank you, Brandon. We're going to turn it over to audience participation. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to have those, share those at this time. Anybody have a question?
Please, feel free. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more, you kind of touched on it, but I would love for you to talk a little bit more about cancel culture.
Oh. It's a double-edged sword. Okay, here we go. First, I'm glad that the Me Too movement, Oscar So White, hashtags and all that stuff, I'm glad that exists. It scratched the surface. Weinstein's in jail because of it, so I'm glad. And other people are in jail because of it. But then there are people who don't do anything except hashtag. There are people who don't go to vote because they think sharing a meme is the same as casting a vote. It is not. It has led to this apathetic, cynical laziness that just drives me insane. People have, the core of everything is hope, right? Star Wars, Star Trek, Superman. At the end of the day, you gotta have hope. Without hope, nothing works. That's why The Last Jedi had problems, because Luke didn't have hope. And the core of a Jedi is hope, right? a lot of the hashtag activism lacks hope. It's all cynicism. And there are people canceling things they don't know anything about. There are people who share memes, don't even know the memes are created by Russian trolls. You know, folks have to be a little bit careful about the sort of cancel culture, because make sure you're canceling the right people and make sure you get the whole story. And I'm not talking about sexual assault or rape, that's a whole different conversation. I'm talking about just disagreeing with somebody and saying, well, they're racist. No, that doesn't make them racist, they don't agree with you. Who are you? Like, what have you done to say that you're this authority? You know, everyone's all of a sudden an expert on viruses, all of a sudden. People don't know, the average person I know cannot tell me the difference between a virus and a bacteria, and how a face mask does not stop a virus. A face mask doesn't stop a virus. A face mask stops you from touching your own face. Face mask might stop some bacteria, but the idea that coronavirus can be, people are going, I think, you know, a part of me is like, did the hand sanitizer and the face mask industry get together just to scare people so they can make billions of dollars? Because it's just like, anyone who knows anything about basic biology can tell you that a face mask does not stop a virus. You know, and the fact that you have to be told to wash your hands, what is this? Like, what are we in like Norse, like it's like 1300s in like, you know, Finland? Of course you wash your hands. That's what we learned in elementary school. But again, health classes have been taken out because of cancel culture. The original cancel culture was parents telling teachers, you can't tell my kid about sanitary napkins. You can't tell my kid about condoms. That's how it started. The evangelical population went out there and told teachers, you can't tell my kid how to take care of their body. I'll do that. But they didn't. And you have to tell people to bathe. I saw a BuzzFeed article about 4 years ago where a bunch of people talked about, they were proudly boasting how unfrequently they showered. And I'm like, you know, you can take a shower. It's not going to destroy the planet. Climate change is, you know, you can take a shower, you know. And that's like the other side of cancel culture where you're getting people not to do common sense things, you know, like bathing and washing hands. Like I was seeing people, they were saying that you don't have to do certain things when you, like, I'm not going to get into it, but there's certain bathroom hygiene that makes sense. There are people on Twitter telling people, you don't have to do that, our body takes care of it. No, it does not. Soap and water takes care of it, you know? And I would say that a lot of this coronavirus stuff, all this misinformation, is all a part of that same circle. It's like a concentric circle of misinformation and cancel culture, and it meets creating pandemics. Because people don't know quite frankly, they don't know what the F they're talking about. You know, because there are people who are constitutional scholars on Twitter, never failed out, and they didn't pay attention to social studies class, right? Like, this is not impeachment, this is not what impeachment means. Like, the last year has shown me how public education has completely failed this society. Because there are people who actually stupidly believe the earth is flat. There are actually people who are that dumb, who are literally that stupid. This planet is, no planet in the universe is flat. What, the earth is flat, but every other planet in the solar system just happens to be a sphere? But the earth is flat, like a table. A planet is not a table, you know? But there are people who actually believe this. That's what I'm saying. Like, science education has failed. And you know why? Because cancel culture is part of it. Because people cancel science. Like gravity. Guess what? If you don't believe in gravity, go jump off the tallest building in LA. Tell me if gravity exists in it. You know, that's all I'm going to say about that.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you feel like you're bringing to the Spider-Man comics.
Oh, thank you for talking about that. Yeah, so the Spider-Man book I did came out 2 weeks ago. It's called Marvel Action Spider-Man. We in the industry are calling it the unofficial sequel to Into the Spider-Verse, because this book has Peter, Gwen, and Miles in it. So I get to tell, I mean, I'm the second, I've been given the second year. The first year was done by Delilah, she's a Star Wars writer. Her name was Delilah something. And I forgot who the first writer was. But they had rotating writers on the original series, and it's aimed toward 8 to 13-year-olds. So what I tried to do was show that, first of all, American kids are not stupid. And me and Marvel Editorial have been kind of like this because they keep wanting me to dumb the book down. And I'm like, 8 to 13-year-olds are not dumb. That's why they all buy manga. Because American comics treat them like morons. You know, it's like, if a kid could understand One Piece or Naruto, which makes no sense half the time, but they can understand Naruto and Dragon Ball. Anyway, oh god damn it, I'm sorry. But it's like if a kid can understand Akira, which is not, it's not Akira, it's Akira. If they can understand that, which the manga, not the movie, you know, they can understand Peter, Gwen, and Miles talking about police corruption. You know, but apparently, according to Marvel, kids are too dumb not to understand, right? So what I've been trying to do is rate the book's profile to me intellectually has been a little bit low. And so even the artist, his name is Fiko Osio, who's absolutely amazing, even he's been like, you know, I really like drawing what you wrote because I'm drawing more sophisticated action scenes. I'm drawing sophisticated conversation sequences, which in a comic book, without the word balloons, is just positioning the talking heads in the right place for maximum, narrative, you know, power. Because talking heads in a comic looks like a newspaper strip. But in a comic book, you got to put people in certain spots. So I've tried to raise the profile a little bit to show that American kids are not stupid, because we are not, and I'm really tired of it. So I've tried to just make it smarter, if I could. Questions, folks, please. If not, I have a 12 o'clock thing about how to break into the industry. So if you want to come to that, that's the workshop after this. But if you have questions, please, if you have questions about the industry, if you can't make it 12 o'clock, this is the time to ask. Anything you ever wanted to know about being a screenwriter, this is the time. Anybody? All right. Yes, thank you.
How did you find your love for screenwriting?
Star Wars and Star Trek.
Oh, okay.
I was an only child. I would spend many hours going to movies by myself as a kid. This is, you know, and the thing, I used to do everything alone and nobody kidnapped me, or, you know, it was just weird. It's like I would leave my house at like 7 a.m. and come back at like 10 p.m. And the world was absolutely fine. This is back when things were actually bad. You know, when crack hit the streets. You know, and it was like gun violence. I'm from Baltimore. I mean, The Wire, it somewhat captures it, and I'm just like, we were all right. So I would go to the movies by myself, and the way the writing stuff came out was I would leave movies sometimes dissatisfied with how that story ended, and I would come up with my own ending. And that kind of led to other things. And one day in 10th grade, I started writing a UFO, an alien invasion story in my notebook, and I handed it to upperclassmen, like juniors and seniors, and they spread it around. They were giving it, they were like, yo, who wrote that? And they were like, dude, you can write. And I was like, what? I was like, maybe I should have charged them to rent my notebook. But I didn't really understand I could make money from this until 96, 97, after I graduated from undergrad. I realized that I could actually make money. And I was living in Boston at the time, which is a pretty big literary city. Boston, New York, Chicago, and LA have pretty powerful literary scenes. And I happened to be in Boston and New York. So I met people, and Marvel and DC used to be out there. So DC's in Burbank now, and Marvel's still in New York. But it was pretty interesting. And I realized I could make money. And I was like, and when I got my first check, that was the big thing. I was like, oh my God, a check for writing. That was incredible. That was incredible. So it started with Star Wars and Star Trek. And then it went to every 80s movie. Like, 80s movies were just the bomb because there were so many original ideas that stuck with us to this day. You know, all these original cartoons, like He-Man or Masters of the Universe, Transformers, G.I. Joe, Robotech, Jim, My Little Pony. And My Little Pony is more to something very strange because their fan base. So it was being around original material hitting the scene, and what I was influenced by, younger kids are influenced by manga now. You know, not American comics, but manga, which is changing the game. So that's that. Any more questions, please? Yes, sir.
I'm also a scriptwriter too, aspiring scriptwriter.
Awesome.
But I'm curious, like, have there been any stories that haven't been translated into production, and like, what has those other stories like done to help you become a better, like,
You stuff that I created that didn't get made, or
yeah,
just in general stuff that I like?
Well, just in general.
Okay.
Of like, how does that like help you become a better like screenwriter?
There's a great book about this I'd recommend. It's called The Greatest Science Fiction Movies Never Made. And it's all about how all these big movies, like Watchmen was one of them at one point, and Dune, you know, there was all these movies that Spielberg was going to make, all this stuff. And what happened is they spent all this money, and at the last minute, everything fell apart. Some of them got remade into other things. The biggest one that I wish it had gotten made was a Spielberg movie called Watch the Skies. It sort of got made into E.T., but Watch the Skies is basically like X-Files, but if Steven Spielberg did it. And the last line of the movie is Watch the Skies, because even though they defeat the threat, it's not over. And I wish that had been made. I mean, it's too late to do it now because we've had 15,000 movies like that.
Mhm.
But Watch the Skies was absolutely the one I wish had gotten made. Yeah. And the good RoboCop sequels that never got made. Yeah. So for my stuff, there was a graphic novel that I came up with called Gemini, and it never got made. And I wish it had. It was about the daughter of an astronaut working on a ring world around the planet, and how she's like the key to like this big salvation thing. But she starts off as just kind of being a grease monkey. Like she's learning how to be an engineer, and then her dad gets killed or whatever, and she gets propelled into the story. Gemini would have been awesome, but that's the one thing I wish I got.
All right, well, thank you all so much for coming today. We are at our time.
Oh, wow.
So-
Oh, that was fun.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Once again, thank you so much for being here. Let's grab a photo. Dr. Sharp, let's grab a photo. So we can.
What room am I going to be in?
So yeah, let
What
me,
room is it?